Hello everybody, this is Albert with Green Tea House. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to talk about the ubiquity or pervasiveness of free or exceedingly cheap tea in the late 19th century when it came to workers, and why employers did this, and how you can even see this today. Now before we begin, if you haven't done so already, please come check out the tea store over in New Braunfels, Texas. Also, subscribe and hit the notification bell if you haven't done so already, and please post a comment. So as you notice, we're doing a kind of a history of tea run right now, and I wanted to talk about this because you see this progression of tea when it got to Europe in the late 1600s being exceedingly expensive. You think of all just the transportation costs and whatnot having to come from the Orient, to now where we're in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where it's exceedingly cheap. And just in case you don't want to go to the history of tea playlist over here, why did it go from exceedingly expensive to exceedingly cheap? A couple of reasons. One, the taxes that were put on Camellia sinensis, on the tea plant and the tea products, was drastically lowered by the late 1800s. Also, the supply became more abundant and easy now that England was growing these teas in their holdings, and the shipping and transportation was quicker now due to the opening of the Suez Canal and faster boats, and then eventually steamboats and whatnot. And so tea became exceedingly cheap. And so now, instead of it just being an aristocratic drink, it became a class free drink. So every class essentially could drink it. So during this time, of course, we have the Industrial Revolution. We have the time of the increase of factories, best maybe exemplified in British literature by Charles Dickens. And so, as I had mentioned previously, the typical middle class and working class blokes were drinking ale and beer as their beverage. They weren't drinking a lot of water because, again, you're worried about bad water, dysentery, and other waterborne diseases. And so when coffee and tea came to England in the late 1600s, I mean, in many ways this was a boon, just like it was a boon in China and everywhere else, because you had to boil the water and that would kill a lot of the microbes. But in England during this time, this was the norm before tea came into the world of England. And so, understandably so, the bourgeoisie factory owners did not really like that the majority of their workers were coming to work after drinking ale or beer, because either they were just outright drunk. It's not like they could be reported to HR during this time. They were outright drunk or they were sluggish. And so when tea became so cheap, you see pioneering companies and entrepreneurs with foresight, factory owners with foresight, they can, hey, tea is a nice alternative to beer and ale, because not only are you not drunk on tea, even though you can be drunk on tea, that is an expression when you drink a lot of tea, you feel kind of loopy because of all the L-theanine, but you can't get drunk on it. Not to mention tea is just healthier. So you saw some factory workers really enjoying this change, and this is kind of linked to the next episode on the temperance movement. So you see wives of factory workers really liking this change, because now tea was being provided at work, and because entrepreneurs with foresight thought, okay, well, let's provide an alternative. And so you saw a lot of foremen and farms would make bulk tea and bring it in these boilers and put it in the pasture where the majority of the farmers were, and just give them unlimited amount of tea. Now, of course, this isn't going to be high grade quality tea, but they're going to give them tea that's ever present, and they can drink limitless amount of tea when they want, and it would already be pre-mixed with milk and sugar. And so this worked out well, right? Because you want to keep these agricultural workers, these factory workers, because this was also employed in factories, you want to keep them well hydrated because they're going to be working better, and you want to keep them away from the beer and ale. And it's not like they couldn't bring beer and ale to work at this time. So it really made sense. The other thing that you see, aside from limitless amount of tea, is that you would see salary wages where there would be essentially a tea stipend or a tea allowance. So let's say somebody's weekly wages were 20 shillings. Well, that's what would be negotiated if they didn't have a tea allowance. But if they had a tea allowance, it'd be down to, let's say, 17 shillings, because the company or the owner of the farm would be allotting unlimited tea. And since they're like, well, you don't need to buy tea, because remember, they were drinking now at this point, the working class, they were drinking tea all the time. And once we're phasing out the beer and ale, they're drinking tea all the time. So they're like, well, you can either choose with unlimited beer or limited tea in your wages, your wage allotment, or not. So you see these two big trends, and part of these two trends lead to the growth of the temperance movement, because a lot of people were inebriated during this time. It was kind of a bleak time. And look, we look back and like, oh man, these people. But think about the limited amount of beverages they had at the time. There weren't a lot of beverages to choose from. It wasn't like what we have now, where you can get kombucha and smoothies and juices and juices of different types and milk and all these things. They didn't have a lot of options. So you see at this time in the late 1800s where owners are like, yeah, let's just give them unlimited tea. And you still see this played out, right? And how many cubicle jobs, office jobs do you see just coffee in the pantry, in the kitchen, or tea bags? Now, you're more likely to see free coffee than free tea bags, but you'll still see this kind of played out where you rarely ever see any sort of company charging people for whatever low-grade Insta coffee that they have in the pantry. And this really traces its roots back to this time of the late 1800s. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and God bless.